Ladies and gentlemen, it is time to bring up our next speaker. Our next speaker is Executive Director of the nonprofit Social Evolutions and co-founder of the Voice and Exit Conference. He is the author of the forthcoming book, The Social Singularity. Please welcome to the stage, Max Borders.
Thank you guys for hanging out till this part of the day, and I hope it's been a long, fruitful day for you. I also understand that I am to put this thing close to my mouth so you can hear me. Let me know does it sound good? Okay, and if it starts to drop, you'll do this number. Well, I'm gonna give you perhaps a strange talk for the ones the rest of the day have given, I assume, at least the last one. And I hope you'll tolerate a little bit of strangeness, but I think you'll enjoy it. I think it'll allow you to look at the world in a bit of a different way if you don't already look at it in that way. So the first thing that I want to point out, and it's going to sound like I'm starting off as a real down note, and that's because I am. The down note is that most people labor under the idea that there are going to be angels in government. At least if we all do our jobs and get our people in, then there will be angels in government. So first, that means some people are angels, which they're not. And if we just install the right people into power, things are going to get better. So we wait on the angels, and we wait, and we wait, and they never seem to appear. So we have a problem. And that's that partisan politics is broken. So way to show up at a quasi-partisan politics event and pee in everyone's cornflakes, okay? But just bear with me for a moment. Voting is basically an illusion, and elections are a spectacle. The Libertarian Party knows better than anybody else that your vote has an infinitesimal chance of actually affecting the outcome of an election. Okay? We all know that, and that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing what we're doing, but even if you voted for one of the other major parties, the likelihood that your vote matters is particularly remote, okay? The other problem with partisan politics is that people are bitter and divided. All one needs to do is get on social media to see that America kind of hates each other right now. And we're losing our coherence as a nation because of it. We're losing that sense of unity and identity as a single people under some organizing set of principles. There are no such principles anymore. We would like for there to be. We would like for there to be something that looks like maybe the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, but it's simply not the case anymore. I'm just laying out some facts. So society is becoming more fractured and incoherent. The folks in this room also know that the way stuff gets done in our capitals, the place to which we outsource all of our problems, hopes, and aspirations, is that special interests collude with power. Every once in a while, people vote their conscience, particularly if there is no direct consequence for failing to do so. Or if they actually do vote their conscience, there should be no difficult side effect to doing so. This is sort of the rationale, and it's completely rational. The rational way that politicians look at the world, I guess you could say. You got to play ball with the special interests and the voters, and you're accountable to all of them. So whatever it is you think your conscience is doing, it's not doing very much. And of course, The longer you're an incumbent, the longer you have that power, it corrupts. You get more and more, you find more and more ways to siphon money into your coffers or have pass some regulation that benefits your business at the expense of another business and so on. We know this as public choice theory, right? Public choice economics. If you've never heard of it, I suggest you do your due diligence and look at the public choice literature, because it will disabuse you of the idea that the right angels are going to be in office and that people vote their conscience in office. So Winston Churchill said, famously, democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others that have been tried from time to time. And so we think, oh, well, you know, democracy kind of stinks, but yeah, I mean, that's all we've got, so we got to play the game. And to some degree, I guess we should. But not to the highest degree, as I'll point out later. So let me put my big caveat in here, because I am, as a speaker, aware that I have an audience of people who is working very hard, laboring in the trenches of electoral politics. So I'm under no illusions about that, okay? And I think that's a good thing, because what you guys do in participating in electoral politics is you represent the last bulwark of human freedom against powerful statists who are playing the game. And I know that, okay? I know that. You're holding back the tide of statism with what you're doing. So this is not to seem like I'm coming to a partisan event saying partisan politics stinks, period, paragraph, move on. I'm saying thank you for doing what you're doing, even though it's a thankless job. And also, let's look at some other things, okay? Let's consider the state of the disunion, okay? So what's interesting about society right now and about what things that are going on in the world outside of politics is a lot of interesting stuff. We now have the technology to create new forms of collective intelligence, which is to say our media apparatuses and the way we collaborate all are changing before our very eyes. And it's an extremely powerful force. Now, this is going to sound paradoxical, but go back to partisan politics. If you look at the digital insurgency that got Donald Trump elected, you should be in awe of it, okay? If that digital insurgency were working to other ends besides getting somebody elected, it would be amazing. But just consider for a moment that it did get Donald Trump elected in the face of what we might call the mediating structures of society in the media. They were overwhelmingly for one candidate, and that was Hillary Clinton. It was so transparent, nobody denies it, not even people who self-identify as Democrat. Because, oh my God, if Donald Trump gets elected, it's going to be the end of the world, right? So these new forms of collective intelligence that's starting with the distributed media apparatus, media have fundamentally changed. It's fundamentally being disrupted and continues to be disrupted. The mainstream media is officially dead. It's still powerful, but it is not the be-all, end-all force anymore that it used to be in the 20th century with Walter Cronkite and the rest. Because Walter Cronkite and the rest gave us our national identity and our social coherence in certain respects, okay? That is no longer the case. Second, we have the technology to create programmable incentives. We have, starting with the blockchain, it is now possible to get people together in interesting ways to interesting ends. Now, we're in a portion of the technology guys call the Gartner hype cycle, which is to say people are sick of hearing about blockchain and some people have gotten burned. It's the same place we were on the internet right around, 1999, 2000. And I'm old enough to have lived through that and to see the internet burgeon after that. So we're going through that with the blockchain. The blockchain is in its nascency, and we're going to see a lot of interesting things after the greedy the greedy folks and the scammers and everybody get out of it. It's fascinating to watch unfold. We're already seeing cryptocurrencies challenge both our orthodoxies about money, and we're also seeing cryptocurrencies challenge the power structures that exist in society. And this has nothing whatsoever to do with electoral politics. We have the technology to break up political and corporate power now. We haven't seen a whole lot of examples of it, but we've seen Uber take on the taxi cab monopolies. Not in Austin, of course. It took the state to come in and fix that. But we're starting to see the first vestiges of people coming together as a hive mind, a kind of hive mind in collaborative fashion to shake things up with respect to the collusion between government and corporations. We have the technology to reframe our thinking and then reorganize ourselves. The first thing we think of right now is, we've got to get the right people in office. We've got to convince other voters to get the right people in office. We've got to figure out the things to say that'll make people more libertarian. And that is true. We must do that. But it's also that we need to think about how to set our minds to programming, for example, the next Bitcoin, or setting our minds to coming up with a DAO or a DAC that can disrupt some sort of corporate or political power structure. And finally, we have the courage and the will to lead humanity into a new era. So we're going to reorganize ourselves using technology, and I'll talk more about this in a little bit. And we've got the will to do it. We're already seeing evidence of that. Satoshi Nakamoto has spawned millions of sons and daughters. What is the next generation of this going to look like? It's fascinating. I'm so happy to be alive right now and so happy to watch it unfold. So this cat right here is a friend of mine. He's a South African fellow, Justin. He's also a Solidity developer, and he says, and a brilliant writer, by the way, he says, the individual won't be either supreme or irrelevant in the coming era. Instead, choices of individuals will be so strongly influenced by programmable incentives that the distinction between individual welfare and their greater good will lose meaning. That's something you don't often hear libertarians say. But suddenly the idea of collectivism as a centralized phenomenon and individualism as, we're out here and we're not, we don't need anybody, this image of libertarians, this image of the individualist, suddenly with programmable incentives becomes, we are both individualist and communitarian, and it reconciles those with programmable incentives anywhere in the world. So, many of you probably own some, who owns cryptocurrency in here? Some, okay. Shocking. Libertarians who own Bitcoin. Now think about it for a moment. A lot of you have probably been in it for a while, and what you're seeing now is kind of a mess, kind of a lot of greed. People are just throwing money at different things. They're not reading the white papers. There's a lot of things that need to be shaken out. And it's primarily driven by money, by the desire to make money fast and not have to do the work that is required to actually create value, okay? That's what motivates some of the ICOs, and it's what motivates some people to invest in crappy ICOs. But Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever he is, I have an idea who I think it might be. He or she or they put mission before money. So when we think about innovating, we normally think of, what can I innovate to make a bunch of money? And being a libertarian means being okay with capitalism and being okay with rational self-interest. I certainly am. I've never been particularly good at it, but if I could, I would. I'd be a millionaire. But I submit to you, we in here, we like money, but we really want to change the world. And so did Satoshi Nakamoto, to the point that he or she or they had a pseudonym. Satoshi Nakamoto is not a real name. It's just something somebody made up. And Satoshi, by creating Bitcoin, wanted to do some things. He wanted to, and I say he because I have an idea who I think it is, but it could be a woman. Expand individual agency. That means make us freer. Everyone is individuals, not by fiat, not by vote, not by the political process, but by God, by design. Second, Satoshi wanted to align incentives for the collective good. So yes, individuals would benefit, but also the good would benefit. There is a harmony, a harmonious aspect to these programmable incentives. It's okay to want the greater good. It's okay to want the individual good, and they are reconcilable. This is proven through the tokenization model. Satoshi wanted to decentralize political power. Now, that might not be perfect, it might not be ideal, but at least you can vote with your feet when you do that, or vote with your dollars. Satoshi wanted, in some sense, to become the social safety net. If we have, starting with currency, if we have a currency that's deflationary, which is to say our purchasing power increases with time instead of decreases, because some central bank says so, central bank that is at the behest of a federal government, that's not there's no security in that. You're losing purchasing power and time. You have incentives to spend, not save. You guys know all this stuff. The Ron Paul phenomenon, the end the Fed movement, is because the monetary system didn't give us the ability to create our own social safety nets. And that starts with the purchasing power of money. But it goes way beyond money, by the way. And Satoshi, I believe, wanted us to create experiments in utopia, and I misspelled it for a reason. Because no utopia exists. We are all participating in communities and trying to do our best to create those communities that are most similar to our values, whatever they may be. And they might not be the same one to the next. So creating experiments in utopia, I believe Satoshi would approve of. And the blockchain and subsequent technologies will allow us to do that. So this old Canadian thinker, late Canadian thinker, Marshall McLuhan, once said, "We become what we behold, we shape our tools, and then our tools shape us." Let me just linger on that for a moment. When we think about the political process, we're trying to make change through it. And that's the default position. That's sort of the default thinking. That's what we always have to do. Okay? But we change society all the time with our innovations, with our tools. Think about, you may or may not like this, I don't know, but just think about it as a brute fact. The birth control pill. Think about how equalizing that was for women, how liberating that was for women, how much power they had then over their own bodies, and how much things changed after 1961 when the birth control pill came out. Profound change in society. You might not think it's a good change. You might think it is a good change. Fact is, it happens. Our tools then shaped us. The printing press, we can go on and on and on. Okay? So this is a vital insight to get us thinking outside of merely partisan politics and thinking about other things that we can do to make the world freer. I just came up with another addendum to this, or corollary, let's call it. And it's we become what we follow. We shape our rules, and then our rules shape us. With programmable incentives, with technology, with 2.0, 3.0, and all these subsequent editions of the blockchain, we're going to be shaping both our rules and our tools. We are creating institutions in the cloud. We're going to have situations in which people can migrate in and out of systems of governance, whatever the government says. We will simply be creating our own institutions and living by them, and the government, as it were. It's happening. It's already happening. The fact that you own a fraction of a Bitcoin is already saying that. And it's already shaped our behavior. It's already, how many of you ever heard of the expression hodl or hodl? There you go. That is a cultural epiphenomenon of something that grows in value overall rather than being inflationary. It's changing who we are as people. And if we can create a freer world by whatever means, but certainly by design, by innovation, we will start to see people change fundamentally in who they are and how they behave, because we create new and different incentive systems. Okay. Let's talk for a moment about some of the really cool stuff that's out there that's already starting to emerge. I call this Notes from the Frontier because this is stuff that's already kind of going on. Digital nomadism, okay? Suddenly now, people are selling their homes and their apartments and deciding to just live in different countries. And when you combine that with cryptocurrencies, it means that the responsibilities and duties of citizenship change for them and that's de facto, not de jure. That's a matter of fact, not of law. So digital nomads are here. We've got Bitcoinionaires creating new frameworks, new communities in Puerto Rico, in Roatan and Honduras. We've got all kinds of stuff going on. So that digital nomadism, so I'm skipping ahead to special economic zones. The poorest countries in the world realize that they're poor and they're sick of it. So they're engaging in the political process, which is okay. We want to do that. We want to combine innovation technology. We want to combine the political process. We want to do everything we can to move the needle in the direction of human freedom, right? And special economic zones are carve-outs that allow people to experiment and to innovate and to engage in entrepreneurship where they couldn't before. That you can do this is called competitive governance. So for example, if I have a tax benefit to going to Puerto Rico with my cryptocurrency, and I do it, I've suddenly engaged in what is known by the folks who think like this as jurisdictional arbitrage. I vote with my feet and I try something out somewhere else. Now that's not going to be for everyone. If you're a single 30-year-old man or woman or even in your 20s, this might be a lot more interesting and viable than for someone who is my age. Married, kids, context, all these people. But even then, there are a lot of people who are starting to move around the world and just live internationally, try new things. Some of them are even taking their families with them and educating their kids with and through the world. And it's happening so fast. You can look it up. It's called digital nomadism. Well, you can look it up. It's happening all the time. There are expat communities everywhere. They're fluid. They're certainly tracked, but it's becoming less and less the case that you can pin someone down to their accidents of birth. Okay? So when you combine that fact with special economic zones and what we've been referring to as programmable incentives, the tokenization of everything, you've got some really interesting stuff going on. You can now collaborate with anyone in any country, many of whom are going to be digital nomads, creating institutions, creating legal structures that you all abide by, and you have incentives to do so because tokenization makes very strong incentives for that to be the case. And the more you develop those systems, the more you weed out the scams and all the garbage, which will happen, you're going to start to see some really interesting things. And these things are growing like fungi around the world, and they really don't care about territorial governance yet. Now, we're going to start seeing these governments, these legacy governments, get really, really antsy about this stuff. They're going to start getting more and more authoritarian, and you're going to start to see the muting and the tamping down of some of these creative energies. But the fact that you can move around somewhere makes it like whack-a-mole, or cut off one head of the hydra and another sprouts. This is the genie, or however you want to look at it, the Pandora's box of human freedom has been opened. And if you don't believe it, you just run in these circles and you'll see. And it's going to keep getting better and better, and we're going to go through a protracted period of authoritarianism. We're going to have to run from this country and worry about something over here, and they're going to start forming extradition treaties, and there's all kinds of weird stuff going on. But innovation happens so fast, and the incentives for it happen so fast, it's going to be really, really hard for legacy governments to enforce these old systems, I believe. DACs, DAOs, and DISCs. Okay, DAC and DAO, this is an acronym for Distributed Autonomous Company or Organization. That means the very idea of a firm that is located here in outside of Austin. Are we actually in Austin right here? Okay. In Austin, a firm that is in Austin. There, of course, you're always going to have territorial firms, like a restaurant that serves food is probably going to, in some sense, have to have a jurisdiction on some territory. But there's going to be a whole heck of a lot of things that don't, that are just going to be firms and organizations that live in the cloud, and people all over the world are going to work for them. So they're multinational organizations that don't have to have touchdown anywhere. They don't have a CEO or a board or the old firm structure. It's an entirely new kind of entity that works more like what do you call those? A slime mold, I guess you could say, in the way its incentives are crafted. So you can try to attack one part of the organization and the other part sprouts up somewhere else. It's just the way it is. It's just like nature. It's evolving. These systems are evolving, just like in any evolutionary system of a biological system. So we're going to have new colonies on land, on the sea, and in the sky, I believe, someday. So right here we have seasteads. I haven't done any work for them for a while, but I always count myself as a scholar for the Seasteading Institute, and I've done some papers for them. But the idea is, if you can build a seastead 11 miles or 24 miles, depending on the requirements, off the territorial waters, then you can do some interesting things because you create opportunities for jurisdictional arbitrage. For people to come on, let's start your biotech company here so that you can avoid, 15 years of FDA bullshit. It's going to happen. It is happening. Blue Frontier, the company that sprang out of the Seasteading Institute, is already building a colony, has already raised money in a seed round for building floating cluster off the coast of French Polynesia. So that's going to be the first one. Okay. So there's really interesting stuff going on with technology, with innovation, with nomadism, just freaking doing it. Not just politics, but other stuff. So what's next, do I believe? So after central banking, I think we're going to see the mass adoption of secure, simple means of storing value. And I should have added to that making transactions. So it should be both, I think, a store of value. People are going to value both a store of value and simple, low-cost means of transacting, a medium of exchange. After ideology. Now, this is going to be maybe don't let this rub you the wrong way, because I think most of us get intuitively as libertarians that, yes, libertarianism is an ideology of sorts. Ultimately, we believe in human freedom, but we also believe in highly diverse ways for people to live their lives in peace. Most other ideologies are asymmetrical to libertarianism in that they tell you how you ought to live your life and they enforce it. Libertarianism says, live it however you want to and don't enforce it. Don't enforce any particular conception of the good, and cluster in those communities you want to do. It doesn't matter whether it's a commune. If you want to share resources with a bunch of people, go ahead. Does any libertarian in here object to communism at small scale? No, because you're doing it freely with others and you have a right of exit. You don't have a gun pointed at you to live in a commune. I live in a commune every day. I've got 2 boys, and they are nothing but takers, let me tell you. So, this is a condition I call after ideology, where we see that people are self-organizing into communities of practice, and we're letting each other be freer because we have to, because these forces are so powerful. We're more tolerant of these communities. They exist, hey, so you guys do your thing. I mean, there are deal breakers, of course, but for the most part, we learn to be more tolerant of pluralism. And competition between and among these communities becomes the norm. It's not, this is the United States, this is how we're going to do it, this is how we're going to live. You may not smoke marijuana, you may not have, sex with a man or whatever it is. You may not keep all of the things that all the resources you work for. You've got to give it to this project and this boondoggle over here. No, that is going to be less of an option in the future, I believe, because people are just going to say, no, you're taxing me too much, Austin. See, I'm going to move to, somewhere else, one of the surrounding counties. I'm going to move to some other country. I'm going to move to Puerto Rico and enjoy the tax benefits and the beautiful weather, whatever, because it's just going to be easier and lower cost to do so. Nation states. So this is kind of a nerdy thing. I like to geek out sometimes, so bear with me on the nerding part of this. But polycentrism is the idea that you have a situation that looks more and more like federalism that the founders conceived, but the idea is that you're breaking up centers of power. You might be trading off some of your ideals about how the universe ought to be or how other people ought to behave. But if there are smaller centers of power in places, it becomes easier to then migrate between and among jurisdictions. That's the idea behind polycentric law. So you have different jurisdictions, different laws, and it's the ones that are most amenable to you. If there are more options, let's say that all 50 states were much more powerful than the federal government, just like in Switzerland. It works in Switzerland. Why couldn't it work here? And then the local governments were even more powerful than the state governments. And we respected, with a subsidiarity rule, those things which those sections or strata of government ought to do. It's not a perfect libertarian paradise, but somewhere in all of those counties or wards or whatever you want to call them, we would find the closest thing to paradise that we could. And that's what's important, and that's what's coming, I truly believe. But it's after the nation state kicks and screams and does all this stuff. It's going to do it, and we might be old people pulling our dentures out before we do get to see what's on the other side of that, but it's coming. And then after welfare. This is something that we always get picked on about, I think. How many of you don't, raise your hand if you don't care a jot about poor people? Shocking. But how many of you ever been accused of not caring about poor people because you self-identify in something like this? Yeah, of course. What we're constantly trying to say is we can do better. There are better ways to uplift the poor that don't make people as dependent and that don't run afoul of principles that we hold dear. Okay? There's a lot of problems with welfare. Still to this day, even after Bill Clinton signed the 1996 Welfare Reform Act, a lot of good that did. We've still got millions on the welfare rolls, and they often don't find dignity in work. They often are dependent, and there's a problem, I think, of creating, at the very least, intergenerational cycles of dependency. But never mind, I won't get on that soapbox. I believe with the technologies, with programmable incentives, with distributed ledger technologies, with what's coming online, and with this desire to help people and stop waiting on government to figure it out as a monolith, we're going to start experimenting with ways to help all kinds of people as communities. We're going to resurrect the mutual aid societies and friendly societies that existed throughout the 19th century in Britain and the United States. We're not only going to resurrect them, we're not only going to show what Alexis de Tocqueville saw when he came over from France and so admired the United States that he wrote a book about it. It's going to be way better. It's going to be technologically sophisticated to the point that it will be Tocqueville on steroids. It will be modelable. It will have feedback loops. It will have communities of practice, best practices emerging, ways that we interact with each other to ensure that the people in our community have their needs met but don't become dependent, and we'll do it all without permission from the state. We will help people better than the government ever could dream of doing. And we'll do it on our own. And they'll try to regulate us away from doing that. But it will be impossible, just like it's impossible to regulate away Bitcoin. Near impossible. Near impossible. I don't want to get too sanguine about it, but so this is the title of the book I've written, and it's coming out in spring. The social singularity. So I believe that this is what we're seeing right now in the big expanse of history. Okay. The moment that we're about to enjoy. And that is a moment on geological time scale. So within our lifetimes, right? Which is a moment when taken in the great expanse of history. We're going to see a complexity transition. So most of the world is designed in sort of, you could have another one. I have another thing that I like to draw that I didn't manage to do this time, but there's a tribal setup. We set up as tribes, tribal bands, where we were more egalitarian. And then we might have had a tribal chief that was the wise person or whatever. But basically, we were small units of hunter-gatherers. Then we were successful at that. We started to have more and more population moving around the world, and we got into hierarchies. Why do we get into hierarchies? We formed hierarchies because we started fighting over resources, essentially. And people who were in that tribal band and not in our tribal band became enemies, and we had to organize ourselves efficiently. And at a certain scale and at a certain level of technological sophistication, hierarchy is more efficient. Okay? Hierarchies emerged for a reason. They're an emergent phenomenon. But yes, they're planned in a sense, but they're also taken in the historical wider ecosystem. They're an emergent phenomenon. So you start to get people warring over stuff. You need someone to give orders, people to take commands, and that's how you start to see the emergence of empires in the age of empires, and that persisted for a long time, and still to some degree exists to this day. The United States being case in point. But we're going to see this complexity transition, because what happens is information flows through systems and needs somewhere to go. Okay, and with peer-to-peer structures, peer-to-peer technologies, you can start to form lateralized relationships that become very, very powerful. We're able to operate more and more like hive minds instead of hierarchies, okay? And when that happens, we're going to see governments sort of swatting at us like bees, but not being able to do much about it as they get stung. I really believe that's going to happen soon. I might be crazy, but at least living in my illusion, it gives me hope to go on, you know. So there's a point beyond which networks render certain mediating structures obsolete. We already saw the death of the media. It's dead. As a mediating structure of society, as something that offers social coherence, the media are dead. Excuse my grammar. Are dead. The ignition of collective intelligence that emerges from networked minds, we're going to start not only thinking better or having access to each other's brains, but we're also going to be collaborating better using programmable incentives. And we might even see emergent forms of technology that we can't anticipate that are going to be like, whoa. Particularly when we start, I get into my crazy futurist stuff, but when we start being able to network our minds with other minds and AI, which is going to be really interesting, and I think it'll happen during our lifetimes. But I won't go on that crazy stuff right now. Humanity organizing more as a hive mind is really what this is about, and it's the most important aspect of this. Imagining ourselves as superorganisms, where we reconcile the collective good with the individual's good, and that will be that. Now, this is my commercial, you know, so why Max, why aren't you up here talking to us? It's not to tell you that partisan politics isn't worth doing. It absolutely is. If you stop doing partisan politics altogether right now, it could be devastating. Having you guys in there in the game, holding back as a bulwark of freedom against this tide of statism that with every emergency comes back in full force, and we need you guys there, right? We need me there. But we also need to do, if we can find it in our talents and in our energies, to be innovators and entrepreneurs as well. Because thinking in the way that I'm suggesting that we ought to think, reframing in the yes, partisan politics, but also mindset means embracing innovative mechanisms of social change that are not political. And that's what I've devoted my life, as long as I can raise money for it, to doing with Social Evolution. So why am I doing this? I'm trying to really help Social Evolution be both the mind and the soul of a movement that I believe the crypto and blockchain movement represents. Right now it is represented by a lot of greed and needs to be represented by more, not so much by money, but by mission. And I want to bring Satoshi's soul back into it. So you can see right there, when we're going to start publishing, hopefully this year, much more than just a Medium page. And you can see this graph is what I'm aiming at. Innovation and decentralization rather than politics and decentralization. Our mission is to liberate people and solve social problems through innovation, not politics, right? So politics is fine, but our mission is to do it through other means and to encourage other people who are talented entrepreneurs, programmers, to use those chops for mission, not just money. We believe that humanity should live in peace, freedom, and abundance to the greatest extent possible. We're at our best when we engage in acts of creativity, collaboration, and compassion. Political and corporate power should be decentralized to the extent it results in the first two. Innovation can and should be a force for human liberation and social problem solving. Better tools and better rules create opportunities to create happier, healthier people, working together in communities, loving each other, respecting each other, and at the very least tolerating each other. And that's something that politics is not giving us right now. So this is my contact information. I hope if you're interested in anything I'm doing, want to talk, want to get coffee, want to write me a $10,000 check, any of those things, you'll jot this down or take my card. Thank you very much for your time. And I think we have a couple of moments for Q&A. Yeah? Yes, sir.
Sure. The notion of federalism, at least to my understanding, was that all of these individual states would be laboratories of experimentation. And what you're suggesting is something simple. So something failed in the existing laboratory. Do you know what?
I have some guesses, and I'm sure there are folks in the room who are far better historians or far abler folks than I at being an historian, but I will say there are some things that definitely happened in history, most of which were emergencies of various kinds that precipitated either ideologies that infected some of the people in power or emergencies where the response to those emergencies was the default thinking to central power. So for example, let's take the most recent one. 2007, 2008, we have the financial crisis, and the linear thinking response is we've got to bail out all these banks, and we've got to bail out, Fannie and Freddie, right? And, the politicians always think of largesse first because it is an opportunity to increase their power and influence, and they succeeded at doing that. So we sort of turn to politicians and people empowered by default is the sort of do something moment rather than thinking by default, let's innovate or let's think as a community or a hive mind or find ways to work together to do things without centralizing it. And there are certainly things that we should do in centralized fashion. Sometimes when I go home and I'm dad, I just gotta say, nope, this is what we're doing. And if you don't like it, that's just too bad, kids, right? I mean, but I don't think that paternalism should extend to a nation of 300 million people. And certainly it is strange that we have neighbors. We are closer, geographically closer to people, to our neighbors in the South than we are to people in Washington, D.C. And I have a hell of a lot more in common with many of those people than I do with just about anyone in Washington, D.C. And yet, we are forced to outsource our sense of responsibility to them, and that has historical precedent that goes back to activist courts. It goes back to the Congress either not wanting to do anything or being too zealous about what they wanted to do. A lot of it had to do with war, where executive power became, in my mind, unconstitutional in the way it behaved with respect to certain kinds of emergencies, namely the two great wars. And after that, it was done. I mean, some say it started with the Civil War. But all of these emergencies serve to erode, whether economic emergencies or wars, serve to erode our sense of connection with each other. The welfare state, the great hits against our communities and our mutual aid apparatuses were created in, for example, the Great Depression, which lasted probably a decade longer than it needed to. Anyway, I could go through all the history, but it's a fascinating question that you pose, and I think it's just a slow erosion, day by day, that power takes little chunks of things away due to either infiltration of alternative ideologies or due to seizing opportunities and emergencies to insert itself. That's my answer. I don't know if that's satisfactory.
How do you feel about making Texas the first state to have its own state cryptocurrency?
That's a good question. I don't know how I feel about it. I had to think about it some. It strikes me that something that is geographically determined would only have benefit if it was a way of saying, harnessing the sort of Republic of Texas national identity for the sake of having our own cryptocurrency. But it seems like the nature of cryptocurrencies to me is transnational, it's interstate, it's why does it need to be here rather than just using something else? So I don't know the answer to that, but I will give it some thought. I just don't know. And really quickly, I wanted to go back to this issue of federalism that you posed, because I think there was the heart of that you were really looking for is, why did we get rid of the laboratories? Well, yeah. No, it's, yeah. So and my answer to that, tentatively as it may be, is that it will succeed by virtue of not being done through statute, but being done through innovation and choices of millions of people working in concert simultaneously.
Hi, thanks for your talk. It was very interesting, and I enjoyed the
Cool,
point.
thank you.
So I intend this as a friendly question, but it may not come across that way at first.
Shoot, I can take it.
What the heck does Social Evolution do?
What-
Your group is a nonprofit media organization, so I'm just interested, how do you hope that this organization will affect change, and what steps do you take to accomplish that?
Yeah, no, that's an absolutely excellent question. It's what we do, and I should have said that. What we do as a media what we will do as a media organization. So the first thing that we do as a media organization is raise money, because we've only been alive now for 7 months. So we're a baby, and it takes time. But I've got a great board of directors, and so what we're trying to do is build a media platform that is balances decentralization. In other words, invites a lot of really interesting people to come and write, but does so through the sort of lens of techno-libertarian thinking. So we're gonna be a publication first, and we're gonna start getting those ideas out there, pumping them out there, rather than having just isolated people write articles here and there. We really want to start pumping out and do video too. I have a video background as well. Sort of, yeah. A distributed think tank is probably a good way of looking at it. But for me, if just just speaking honestly, I think there's a degree to which think tanks can be, if it's not accessible and if it's not inspirational, then it tends to just line the shelves of the Temple of Liberty rather than doing anything. You know, the first white paper that ever did the world any good, and that I can remember, was probably 2009 Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper. Maybe the white paper from John Goodman on HSAs back in the 90s, but I mean, there are so many. I call it the white paper industrial complex, and it's not to say that I don't. I've worked for think tanks, but a lot of times, these policy folks just publish white papers and they line the shelves and collect dust. And we want stuff to actually be accessible to people. Is there anybody who's a programmer in the room? Okay, cool. See, I want someone to read an article who's a programmer and go, yeah, oh, I got something. Oh yeah, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna start working on this, and I'm gonna call my two friends, and we're gonna start coding something, or we're gonna do something, because I can't code. So my contribution is to inspire those folks.
All right, we have time for one more question.
One of the challenges with cryptocurrency is adoption by vendors. Do you see any encouraging signs globally that would make you think that crypto is going to be more adopted as a currency?
I mean, it's going to go in fits and starts. So there's a lot of speculators, there's a lot of regulators, and the speculators and the regulators do this dance, right? So I believe there are fundamentals to cryptocurrencies that are very healthy, and the hodlers understand this. But the dance between the regulators and the speculators is like, it creates this illusion of just this. I mean, it's not an illusion at all. It's just a fact that the regulators scare the speculators get back in, and they're not really thoughtful. They're trying to arbitrage based on these various factors, and it creates a lot more volatility than that would need to be in there in an ideal world, but we don't live in an ideal world. So I think fundamentally over time, the two things that need to happen with cryptocurrencies, in my opinion, humble as it may be, is this: security and simplicity. it's really hard for most people to understand what's going on and to keep up with it. And that is just getting on Coinbase, which is great. Coinbase is great for simplicity and to some degree security, although it's not as secure as it could be because it's a central point of failure, right? Still, getting people involved in some way so it's like, oh my gosh, they see the benefit of it and it's really easy to do. People who are old, like, hardcore Bitcoin core people are like, no, man, you gotta manage your wallets. You gotta, this is you gotta be personally responsible for your sovereignty and all this stuff. It's like, well, if you have that attitude, then you're not interested in rapid adoption because that's not the way most people think and are. You're blaming the victim, right? It's just, and I think when the minute that, I think that they're already working on it. There's a bunch of coders out there who are working on making it simple and secure. And once we reach that threshold and it remains relatively, the immune system remains intact from government forces and regulatory forces, I think we're going to start seeing mass adoption. In the same way that Uber operated in a legal gray area for a very long time before finally people just said, no, we want this and we're going to have it. And politics had to kind of catch up with that. And I think that'll happen with cryptocurrencies too. Thank you very much.